Hello there, Flip here, and today, this is going to be the best time to be a Genshin fan. Maybe not a Dehya fan, but a Genshin fan in general. Let's just briefly look over the livestream, which was probably a few weeks ago now because I'm expecting this video to be late. I think it's going to go down as the most entertaining and memorable Genshin livestream next to the one about the first anniversary. Not because MIHOYO knows how to make a really engaging and entertaining stream, but because the decisions they make are so ironically bad that's hilarious. Not only do we just not get the Eula rerun when it's been well over a year at this point, they decide to make Mika, who is a physical damage buffer, run alongside Ayaka and Shenhe, who are both cryo damage dealers. Who thought of this? Goro runs alongside Ito, Sarah runs alongside Raiden, Farzan runs alongside Skara. Mika? Yeah, Ayaka. You know, only the character who had the longest running banner in Genshin history. And then not only that, but we also get the Dehya reveal that she's on the standard banner. And so we have Dehya, her leaks come out, and she's looking to be dog shit. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. A mix between supportive utility and offense that just doesn't work that well. So when we roll around to when the beta next updates, we expect her to get buffed, as her performance was shaping to be quite underwhelming. You know, like what happened with Ayato. Ayato used to have a 12-second skill cooldown, which was buffed to be reduced all the way down to 6 seconds as it is now. So after seeing Dehya's performance, you know, we thought it would be better. And then the beta updates roll around. And they nerf her. And then every week we were just waiting and waiting. She's gonna be buffed, right? She's not going to get buffed, is she? And then after all that, and some of the diehard Dehya stands saying they're going to still roll for her and try to get her cons as they're actually decent, you know, at C6 she can actually compete with a Caesarea Emiya. And after all of that, they decide to reveal that she's going to be put on the standard banner. In Black History Month as well, like, come on, MIHOYO. And here we are. Today we're going to be having a little Genshin investigation. Wait, that's actually a good series idea. To determine whether or not MIHOYO was racist by looking at all the melanated characters and evaluating their in-game performance, as well as any of the other minor controversies that has happened because of their darker skin. Also, just because I know people aren't going to get it, no, I don't actually think MIHOYO is racist. I just thought it'd be a good reason to look over all the POC in Genshin, especially going off of the Dehya controversy. So now we have to ask who actually are the Black Genshin characters, because this is a room for discussion. Many people say that characters like Jayan and Kaya aren't actually ebony, but they are just tanned, and fair enough. The game doesn't really give us a ton of info to go on regardless, but for the sake of this video, any character that isn't hex code #FFFFF, they work for this video. And that leaves us with Candice, Sinnoh, Dehya, Kaya, Jinyan, and that's it. Which is surprisingly less than I thought. So starting from what a lot of people consider to be the worst, which is surprise surprise Dehya, let's just talk about why she sucks in more detail and why she's so controversial. So even just ignoring how she is in the meta, the intended state they released Dehya in is actually criminal. First, starting with the most talked about one, which I don't know how relevant it will be at the time of this video, but she can't jump. If you enter her burst mode and decide to make the absolutely abhorrent foolhardy decision of pressing the jump button, or you just happen to misclick, goodbye to your burst. And you may think that it's not a big deal, you probably aren't going to be jumping anyways with Dehya, but at the same time, why? It doesn't matter if it's practical or not, why is she just not allowed to jump? It's so random. Let's look at Ito or Raiden, you probably aren't jumping much with them either, but that doesn't mean that jumping should just kill their bursts. Also, God forbid you run into a wall or a tiny ledge, because that also cancels it out too. Dehya also can't target Asta's tail properly as she still reads his hitbox on the surface, even though the fat fucker is underground. If enemies are too tall, she can fail to trigger burgeons on them. Also, she can die off field. This probably isn't going to happen very often, but at the same time, not even corrosion does this. I refuse to believe this character was proof tested at all. The foundation of her programming is being held together by toothpicks and chewing gum. A character this buggy should never have been released. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. One of the solutions being tested is to just not use her burst at all. For the amount of ER you need to sustain Dehya's burst every rotation or every other rotation, the animation time, the damage it does, and how much power application you get from it, on a lot of teams like Melt Gun U, Burgeon, or Hyperbloom, you could probably just skip using her burst and lose not much. But for like burning teams or mono pyro, you'd ideally want to burst very frequently there. And sure, we've discussed her offensive issues enough, let's talk about her defensive utility. Surely there are no holes in it at all. So basically, Dehya's defensive utility comes in two ways. The first one is that she increases resistance to interruption. I don't know the exact value, but it apparently isn't anything ridiculously high until you trigger her A4, which for 9 seconds after using your burst or skill twice, will give you an even stronger resistance. And then her second form of defensive utility comes when someone in her field takes damage. Dehya will eat 50% of it at talent level 10, and it will damage her instead. And it kind of sucks. If you had the option to take a shielder over Dehya, most of the time you're going to take the shielder. Also, the damage isn't disappearing or being cured like in the case of a healer or shielder, it's just allowing you to die slower. So without extra forms of mitigation against hyper aggressive enemies like triple Kenki, or you know, the scorpion and chicken duo, there's the chance Dehya will just be one of the worst ways to approach these fights. And her teams aren't honestly much better either. In Burgeon, she not only doesn't trigger that many Burgeons regardless, but also gets entirely outclassed by Thoma. In Mono Pyro, you have a ton of alternatives that work better. Xinyan with equal investment is actually competitive with her. In Burning, no one plays it, let's be completely honest. And in Milk on You, she's kind of redundant. Like, you have Ganyu, Bennett, and then Dehya, who should cover the role of Zhongli and Zhangling, right? But then you realize she doesn't apply enough Pyro by herself to sustain Ganyu's melts. So you have to bring a secondary source of Pyro, which most of the time, they would be perfectly capable of melting all of Ganyu's charge attacks anyways, to where Dehya ends up being the most replaceable as she's no longer doing anything that important. Do you bring a Dendra for burning to melt? Nahida could do that by herself with Bennett. Dendra MC. Cole isn't helping much as he's just worse than bringing Zhangling, and so on and so on. There is really no team where Dehya is even a noteworthy side grade over other options, which kind of just sucks. I love Dehya because she's hot, I'm a simp, what did you expect me to say? Her character design is great and she was amazing in the Archon quest, but for what I just don't understand, MIHOYO just gave up on her. I hope no one believes that she was actually intended to be a standard banner character from the beginning. I feel like maybe due to like crunch, poor time management or whatever, they just didn't have enough time to fully flesh out Dehya and they just decided to dump her on the standard banner, which is very upsetting. And now moving on to talk about Dehya number 2, we have Xinyan, the character that is revered by a lot of leeway due to the way she looks. And also the character that went the longest from her initial release to not appear in any significant story related content. Xinyan is also a character that isn't particularly amazing. If you look at how she's supposed to be played, traditionally she's a physical damage dealer / support on the pyro element, meaning by default you lose 2 team slots just trying to set up Superconduct if you want to use her as a physical carry. On top of it just not performing that great regardless. It also doesn't help the fact that she has split scalings, which can be good, but in Xinyan's case it just makes her worse. And even then, if you're deciding what to build between defense and attack, her shield, even with full defense, is still a paper shield anyway, so it doesn't matter. Because of this, Xinyan only really has niches. She can help set up Eula nukes, which is magnificent, I guess. You can use her in VV Tau to enable pyro swirling, but at the same time, you already have a ton of options for VV Tau, and because of the setup, it's normally preferred you run something like Double Hydro instead anyways. As a mono pyro team, that is arguably better than Dehya, but I think that's about it. Xinyan suffers from split scalings, low damage, low shield scalings, and horrible cooldowns. Also, I've seen varied answers, but she may or may not still have a bug that's been with her since release, that even when hitting the appropriate amount of enemies for her level 3 shield, it just doesn't proc. Which is of course a pretty big issue as the level 3 shield is stronger and also gives additional pyro application, which can be helpful. Now, let's move on to our third best brother, or sister in this case, Candice. Candice is weird. She's Yunjin but with a good element and can give a Hydro infusion, which sounds good on paper, until you remember that she's also going to suffer Yunjin's main issue, which is that very few characters normal attack, and even less want a Hydro infusion. But this doesn't stop Candice from actually having some solid teams where you can make her a definitive use case. Unlike Xinyan and Cooler Xinyan, Candice can be used on all the Bloom team archetypes pretty decently. For Burgeon and Nilo Bloom, a on-field Hydra character like Kokomi can take full advantage of her buff, which makes it feel like you're not coping out by using this character. And another team I really like using Candice on is National. Shut the fuck up. I know, National butt chest, but it's pretty solid in my opinion. You can either have Xingqiu on field with buffed Hydro auto attacks and buffed rain swords through standing in Bennett's ring, or you can run Bennett on field and have him do Hydro auto attacks and be able to vape his skill, while also generating a ton of particles for Zhangling. Candace is still like bottom of the barrel, but she feels more like the clusterfuck of just mediocre 4-stars we've gotten, rather than Hoyo just actually fucking hating the character. She doesn't have any major bugs or issues that get clowned on. She's just a niche character with a not so strong playstyle in which I think she has potential to be quite strong later on, but that isn't enough for me to really suggest building her over other Hydro characters. Besides that, I also really like how she gave theory crafting a more comprehensive look into how elemental infusions on weapons work, which we needed for a really long time. So now we have Sino and Kaya left. Who do I think is better between the two? Well, to quote the most intelligent, well-renowned math-certified Genshin theory crafter, Kaya is just better. So let's discuss Sino for a bit. I don't like this character. Okay, no, I like Sino as a character, he looks badass, but I hate playing him. He's one of the most frustrating characters to work with, on top of the fact that he still has no teammates. A lot of people thought Nahida would fix a lot of Sino's issues, but that only really applies in extended fights, because other times, Sino will fucking slaughter everything in sight that has the Nahida mark, and you know, since the Nahida mark doesn't apply to new enemies off field, you're just slumped between just not having Dendra uptime for the rest of your rotation, or cutting your rotation very early and losing a ton of energy. Also, the eye. Who thought of this mechanic? Having to wait for this thing to take down only to mistime it, or just not having my skill ready because I pressed it early sucks. Sino's damage is at least pretty solid, his quick bloom and aggravate teams do enough damage, and I say it for a lot of characters. I just think for his gameplay issues, which I talked about quite a lot in another video, I don't think it's worth pulling or building him until he gets a lot better teammates that can support him better. There are also just a lot of other competent Electro characters that outperform Sino's aggravate teams. Sino is passable, but he was still hoed. With better supports, he'll be a lot better than he is now, but we'll have to wait and see. Finally, let's close out by covering Kaya. And he's alright. Cryo teams have kind of fallen off with the rise of Dendro, and due to the abundance of bosses in Abyss, Freeze has been declining. But despite that, cryo teams still have a decent place in the meta, and there are still teams like reverse melt comps that don't take away any extremely valuable units for a Dendro team on the other side. So like, if you lose Xingqiu to build a Hyper Bloom team, you can still have a very reliable Bennett and Zhangling team. Like with Geo, we are kind of still waiting for cryo to do something more, as a lot of elements and characters have received indirect buffs that just further the gap between the things that have remained relatively the same. But even then, as things stand, I would recommend gearing out Kaya more than any other character here, which to be honest speaks more to how mediocre everyone else here is. Kaya of course does have his merits. He's relatively cheap to get going, noticeably impacts most of his teams through the amount of energy he generates, and he has pretty good cryo uptime, which sucks because even then, in comparison to a lot of other teams you can build, I can't really say Melt or Freeze in Abyss currently is what I would go to. And with that, is Hoyoverse racist? Do they have the colonizer instinct inside of them? No, I don't really think so. I honestly do think you can just chalk it down to coincidence. We only have 5 melanated characters, 3 of which are pretty okay, and there are also a ton of bad characters that aren't colored. So I think trying to use Dehya and Jinyan as the scapegoat of this argument falls apart. In my opinion, Dehya was supposed to be a character with a lot more depth, but Hoyo realized the workload and decided to just prematurely give up as they have to hit deadlines. And so no one asked for buffs, they just dump her in the standard banner, which also helps them make a lot of initial cash as there are players scared they may never get her, which I do think is pretty scummy. That would at least be my guess to explain how she's released, as it's not even just performance, she just feels like shit to play. And I really do hope Hoyo changes stuff to make her feel and play a lot better, but the moment we saw that standard banner release, it was a nail in the coffin. And on that note, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment why you think Dehya's in the state she is in, as I'd love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.
Need another lick and she be counting in my rest. I'll be feeling hella rich, no Brian. Honest step, about to make another hit. God, bitch, in my life.